Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Magic Circle. Please welcome to the stage your host, Richard Young.
Thank you so much, guys. It's absolutely amazing. Derren Brown's back there. It's going to be incredible. Thank you so much for coming, and well done for grabbing these tickets. They were gone in a flash, and we could have sold this place like 10 times over. So well done for being here. Hope you have a great night. It was a great little perk. There was a lot of people who wanted these tickets who, frankly, I don't like very much. So that was a lovely thing. So here's how tonight's going to work. I'm going to interview Derren for about an hour. Then we're going to turn it to you. You get to ask some questions. Obviously, not every single one of you, but if you think of a question, James Friedman's going to be out there with a microphone to take some questions a little bit later. After that, we'll all go downstairs and we'll give you your books and get them all signed. It's going to be great. And I know some of you are wondering, what podcast? He hasn't made a podcast for years. Well, I miss it, quite honestly, and so I decided I'm going to bring it back, and it's going to be... I realised actually I really had to reinvent it. It was kind of copied a lot by other people. So me and a few friends have come up with something which we think is going to be brilliant. It's going to be called the Magicians Podcast Network. And every week you'll get 3 magic podcasts. It's going to be brilliant. It'll be the one you know, me and Hudson chatting rubbish. My friend Alex McAleer will take you back through, it's a nostalgia podcast. He'll go back every week and watch an old magic TV special. And then he'll be talking to a guest, often who was involved in the TV show. And then Harry and Neb, my great friends, will face the magic every week. I'll set them a little challenge, and they will go out and investigate a magic thing. It's going to be great fun. It'll be launching later this summer. And I realised if I was going to bring it back, that we had to launch with something big. And that's what you're about to see recorded right now. I wrote a big, long introduction to introduce him. And then I read in the book about not giving big introductions to people. So that went in the bin. And I don't need to introduce him. I know who he is. You know who he is. Please go crazy. Welcome to the stage, Mr. Derren Brown.
Thank you very much. Oh, there I am. Thank you very, very much. Thank you for buying the book. That's you're the first people. I've just seen the very first copy of the deluxe one that I've never seen. So it's just really exciting for me. Just that you bought the book. That's just amazing. That hasn't happened yet. No one's got it. And having written the thing, and then it's amazing when it actually, if any of you have written anything, when it actually comes into the real world and people are, reading it and stuff is huge. So it means a lot, and it's lovely to be here, and thank you hugely. And you are one of the nicest and loveliest people in magic.
Oh, that's very
sweet. It's a real treat to be doing this.
Thank you for being here. It's amazing. So I was really lucky. I have already read the book. You gave me an advance copy to read, and I've read it cover to cover. And first of all, I just want to
Which is no mean feat. It's not a small thing.
This book is genuinely going to change magic, I believe, and it's going to change the way you think about magic and the way you perform your magic. And I'm not exaggerating. It's incredible. And my first question I wanted to ask, I got a million questions, but then I suddenly thought, do you know the one question I want to ask? I'm not going to ask.
Did you stop at a million and go, that's enough? Yeah.
The first one I wanted to ask you actually was why you wrote it. It's not a trick book. It's all of your theories, and most importantly, we'll talk a bit later, it's your process as well that you go through when you create a show.
Yes, there are a few tricks in there, just because when people might say, are there any tricks in there? I didn't want the answer just to be no, so there are a few in there. But I wrote it because I was touring. I find it hard to, tour and do a show in the evening unless I have something to do during the days. And writing is, for me, the lovely. It's such a lovely rhythm of waking up late, going to a coffee shop, writing all day, and then going out and doing the show. And it's a lovely. I love that. But it's hard to write a book that needs any kind of research or anything if you're on the road, because I can't really take books with me. So I just thought, I'll write the magic book. I was thinking, I've sort of made a few notes over the years. Thought, one day maybe that'd be a nice thing to do after Pure Effect and Absolute Magic many years ago. So I thought I would do that. And then it was actually a really helpful thing because it was a very long tour. And I think if I hadn't, which is why it's such a long book, and if I hadn't had that to keep me going, I really don't know what I would have done. So it was a bit of a lifesaver. So even if you weren't All Here Now never made it out in the world. No one ever read it. It was a really therapeutic, lovely exercise. And also it meant that it's lovely reading back through, and there were just things I'd forgotten. It's not all just about theory. There's just stuff that felt like that had happened during the show that I thought this is worth recording, because how do you get out of that? When someone's got their head stuck to the table in the bar.
So it's all in there.
Yeah, I mean, she wasn't on stage or anything. She just, in the bar, I got this thing, announcement. I get called in the interval because someone's head stuck to the table in the bar. And I got there and she's sobbing and she's upset and she's not interested in me trying to sort her out. I don't know what it was, other than she'd somehow responded to something kind of, hypnotic. So I couldn't do anything. She wouldn't allow me to help her at all. So actually the whole of the second half of the show, knowing there was a woman with her head stuck to the table in the bar upstairs, which luckily no one else had seen, because she just looked like she was drunk, so everyone had ignored her. And that was a really uncomfortable second half of the show. I'm thinking she's just there and angry. And we'd had a bit of we weirdly had an argument about it, because I had to go and leave for the second half. She wasn't interested in, me helping her. And then I sort of had to say, well, I've got to go now and do the second half of the show. She's like, okay, that's fine, you go then. I don't. Well, I'll come back. I'll come back later, but I've got to go. Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, you enjoy the show. So I'm sort of like, yeah, I will. And then I'm doing the whole of the second half, thinking, why was I shitty with that woman? Like, her head stuck with it. Anyway, but anyway, it was nice to be able to put it in a book and go, so you probably won't have exactly that situation arise. But what do you do? And how do you deal with all the weird stuff of just, people getting hurt or just things happening, all that stuff. How do you deal with all that, which you wouldn't find in a magic book, for example? All the kind of the realities of doing shows that are separate from magic technique. And so there's lots of kind of layers to it, but it was very nice to have the opportunity to do that and record those things. And,
It's pretty relentless for you, that, isn't it? You talk in the book about how sometimes you'll get to the next venue and someone from the last venue has written to you because they know you're going to be at that venue and will say, I haven't got my memory back from the card trick. Like, how do you deal with that, Derren? You've dealt with that for 20 years, haven't you?
Yeah.
Does it affect you in terms of you being able to go out in public and things? Does it make you a bit anxious that stuff like this can happen?
No, but it was different with this show for some reason. Have most of you seen Showman? I don't want to spoil anything, but there's it's a card trick, but there was a card trick in the show that involves a lot of people in the audience feeling like they've lost a chunk of time. And I didn't sort of think anything of that. There's hypnosis stuff as well in the first half, but all quite sort of light, really. And I very often had people that just, for whatever reason, react. They're not necessarily on stage, but they just react strongly to something and they need a bit of attention in the interval or afterwards. And that's always been fine. It always happens. And it's always fine. It's never been a problem. But this was the first year, presumably to do with the madness of COVID and just the general, I don't know, the fragility maybe of younger people nowadays, I don't know. But for the first time, I was having people respond with genuine trauma to this. Not so much the card trick itself, but the idea that they might have, they found it very violating, I guess, or the idea that they've lost time, that therefore there's a memory that's been lost. I guess that could be quite a triggering thing for some people if they've repressed memories from when they were younger or whatever. Either way, it suddenly was a big thing that I was having to deal with far more intensely than previously, and also couldn't the sillier stuff, like someone who I told people in the audience to forget their names, and then sometimes people still couldn't remember their name afterwards, and I've always been able to sort that sort of thing out, but I was having to let people go home not knowing their names, and I couldn't. Well, I know it's funny. It's funny describing it now, but at the time it's like, she really thinks she's called Kermit. She's plucked that name out the air, getting very angry. Nothing to do with the show. Again, she's just plucked that out the air. She's getting very upset at any attempt from me. This is some lady, I can't remember where I was. So, okay, I know it'll wear off. She'll go to sleep and sleep it off and everything, but it's unnerving to be in that situation. So there was definitely something weird in the air this year, which I haven't noticed before. Generally, those things are fine and okay. The big thing I learned, by the way, if any of you do any hypnosis, the big learning thing for me that I put in there, and I was learning it in real time, including this woman with her head on the stuck to the table, was that it's panic attacks. That sometimes people have responded a bit to the hypnosis, and it's not the hypnosis that's then leaving them in a stuck state, but that's the problem, is they're having a panic attack when they're in it, because they suddenly go, I can't open my eyes, and then that's creating the panic attack, and that's creating the anxiety that's making everything worse. And once I started saying, don't do this, don't take part in any of this, if you're at all prone to panic attacks, it basically stopped happening. And that's after 30 years of doing it. It's panic attacks. That's because I could never really understand. I understand how hypnosis works, I think. I couldn't understand what was going on with the odd person that would have a strange response to it. And then I realized it's panic attacks. So if any of you do it, it's a good thing to say. Don't take part in this if you respond to it. So anyway, yeah, that kind of stuff was being learned in real time and is all in there too.
So as I mentioned, there are some interesting bits in here actually where, I mean, one of my favorite bits, without going into any details, is you tackle the ambitious card trick and you show us your process you go through. And the ambitious card turns from what we all do into what would be a 20-minute piece of theatre with a beginning, middle, and an end, and multiple people on stage and a story. And this is the question I really am excited to ask you the most. I think you've given away your biggest secret in this book, in that you've given away your process that you go through. And as someone who is relentlessly copied by other magicians, is that a good idea?
Now you mention it. Well, it's a funny one, that, isn't it? I suppose. Yeah, and the point of the ambitious thing was it's not my ambitious card routine, but it was how could you take something like that you instinctively would have no real interest perhaps in doing and turn it into a stage piece. Yeah, I know what you mean. I kind of, I don't know if it even happens that much now. I kind of don't really think much about it. There certainly was a time when I was very aware of people copying, and it was a bit galling for a bit, and then I sort of got used to it and decided it didn't have to be a problem. It didn't bother me. So I think it doesn't matter. I just felt like this is stuff that's worth saying. How you put a show together, and then how you put a show together, how you structure a show, and then how you actually perform a show, how you act a show, how you deal with spectators, how you just approach the whole. I talk a lot about energy in it, which is not a very me sort of word, but it's a good. Just so many shows, so much of the way we do magic is sort of just like. I'm great, and that's sort of the subtext of everything is look how great I am. And I sort of, over the years, I've definitely tried to make the shows a thing that I'm sort of giving, or it's about the audience. It's not about me. I mean, I kind of know I'm on stage doing the show, so that kind of box is already ticked. I shouldn't have to now go out there and overtly go, look at me. So things like how do you do that? How do you bring, I don't know, humanity to a show, or make it about the audience, or just thinking about those things, because I don't ever remember reading about those kind of things. They're things I've discovered for myself, but I do think they are the most important things. There were a couple of, I suppose, moments that were really educational for me. And when I say 30 years of mistakes, it is that. I mean, this is basically a lot of things that I've learned from doing it wrong, or things that I've learned from other people, a lot from Andrew O'Connor and Andy Nyman, who we write the shows together and they direct it, as I'm sure you know. So just stuff I've learned, and then just stuff I've learned from audiences and participants that, But I remember in a recent show, Secrets, I was doing it in New York, and it was called Underground here, but essentially the same show. And the finale of that was a version of David Berglass's Especology, and it had Jason Sudeikis coming out and singing a song at the end on video, and in the previous version here, it had McFly doing the same. Anyway, there's a lot of, in that Berglassy way, a lot of multiple sort of climaxes, and these are, free applause cues and match-ups and coincidences that are coming out of this, lineup of things. And it was interesting because your instinct is to make more and more of those, and go, oh, we can also do this, and that can also match that, and then that get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And you sort of realize that there's a tipping point for the audience where it is like, oh, wow, more and more. And then it becomes sort of, okay, lovely. Oh, brilliant. And then, so and then you're into like diminishing returns. So we started subtracting magic effects to bring the audience back to a kind of what felt like a sweet spot where the whole thing would be more magical because it didn't outstay its welcome. But I just remember sort of coming home in a cab thinking, that's interesting that adding more magic makes it less magical, that the magical experience isn't about putting more magic into it. It's not about more tricks or expanding the tricks. It was actually subtracting that was making it more magical. I think so
Is it because it makes it clearer? You talk about clarity.
It's partly clarity, but it's about honoring a sort of an emotional responsibility over a magical responsibility. That sometimes we often get this right in the shows, that there's a choice between going for a sort of you're kind of like a magical duty, or we could do this, and an emotional duty, which doesn't mean saccharine or sort of sentimental. It just the emotional could be the drive of the sort of the just journey you're taking everyone on at that moment. That is more important than the magic trick. And just going, oh, and I can also do this, in no way is necessarily going to add to the show. That might be a real distraction. So I think all that stuff's really important, because if you're doing a show, and this is kind of a book written for magicians and mentalists that are thinking of doing shows. It's not a book about close-up. I guess I've sort of written those books years ago. So there are these other responsibilities. You're taking people on a long journey, and which might be half an hour, or it might be a couple of hours, or whatever. But that has nothing to do. That's like be the same if you were a singer or anything else. It's just there is an emotional responsibility that ultimately will be more important than the magic tricks. I think that's important.
I actually wondered, this is a little bit of a cheeky question, but there's a few times in the book you talk about, it's very brief actually, where you talk about how you really don't enjoy watching magic most of the time. And I wondered actually if some of what this book is a bit of a gift to us, because magic sometimes frustrates you to watch. And it's kind of like you've figured some stuff out that the rest of us haven't. Is that any part of this where you kind of feel like, God, if only they knew that actually if you made it mean something to the audience, it would, connect more with an audience. And also, importantly, what is it about watching magic that you do find frustrating?
Well, that's really hard to say. I think there are no answers other than the individual performers. I've always had, ever since I was much younger, watching gala shows when the MC would come out, introduce the next act, and often there's just a microphone in the middle of the stage. He goes off, or she goes off, and then there's a pause before the next act come on. And I always remember, this is before I was doing anything, certainly before TV, but just thinking, this is such an exciting moment. Like, anything could happen now. Like, and it's like, how do you then live up to that? And it's very rare, and you can normally tell within 3 seconds of the next performer coming out whether they are going to, just from the way they walk to the microphone, are they picking that up and harnessing it? Or is it sort of like, oh, and you're sort of into that other sort of enjoyment of magical gala shows, which that other thing that can happen. I guess I'd always had a clear, and I think often you do find your way to what you want by knowing what you don't want. Now, sometimes that's clearer. You get a sense of, oh, no, I don't like that, but you don't know quite what it is. And it took me a long time to realize actually this thing about not making it about yourself and what that actually means, because it's sort of easy to say, but actually what that means in terms of actually like writing a show and performing and but yeah, they just felt like important things to say. I suppose there is this weird thing of we generally, or the temptations to become the worst version of yourself on stage, and that's a really odd thing. Whereas if we are performers and this is our job, why would we go from being perfectly nice people in real life to sort of like just the worst version of yourself? That's just such an easy thing to do, and I guess it's just insecurity. And there's
you talk about stages, don't you? That particularly even you identify yourself when you're in your 20s. The way magicians are when they're in their 20s to the way they are in their 30s, 40s. We go through different stages, and you sort of say it sort of sorts itself out a bit, doesn't it?
It does, yeah, and I think those questions of character do come with just age and growing up, and those things make a difference a lot. But it's, if you see people in real life who are just trying to impress you, and that's obvious, it's not a likable quality, right? We don't generally warn people who are trying to impress us. And the big problem with magic is that the bottom line of it is, I'm impressive. It's like it doesn't very often have much else to say other than, look at this great thing I did. And that's fine, that's great. That's like part of also what makes it amazing. But that is also something that could outstay its welcome, or is something that is something to deal with and get round if you're putting a show together of any length, because in real life we don't like that. So why would we like it more on stage, and why would we revert to that as opposed to, I don't know, leaning into what the best part of ourselves, or the things we would most want to impart or give an audience, or but those are totally other, they're just other things to think about. They're just part of your life that you might bring to what you do. Nothing really to do with technique as such.
If I can sort of link two things, bear in mind what you've just said, actually. You do talk in the book about close-up magic a bit, and one of the things you talk about is, I mean, it's one of my favourite quotes in the whole book. You say that the proximity of the performance encourages politeness, which I think is brilliant. And one thing, do you have a way around that? Like for a young performer who's working close-up, getting those great reactions where they're going, you're the best magician I've ever seen, but ultimately, as you said, the proximity is encouraging politeness. How can you kind of get an honest feedback if that's what you're encountering week after week performing in restaurants like you did, for example, in your 20s?
Well, some of it's, I don't think it's like necessarily insincere, is it? People will say that and mean it as well. That's not because often people haven't seen close-up magic before, and it is can be a lovely and special thing to see. So I don't know. I don't think you can rush it. I don't think you can speed up the process that comes with just doing something for a long time and just and learning. I mean, I guess all you can do is show people the same tricks that are going to be honest, and they're going to tell you if it's not that interesting or if you're flashing or whatever. Then those you just need someone else to sort of tell you. But I think you can't really. I always remember thinking, I did close up for years, and I never got over how awkward it felt approaching a table, and then I just remember thinking, I think it's good that I find it really awkward to approach a table, because if I found this really comfortable, I'd probably be quite an annoying magician. Because of course it's a weird thing to interrupt people. That's a thing to do sensitively, and I'm not saying I got it right or that was any better than anybody else, but I think the kind of awareness of just ordinary, just the ordinary niceties of connections. Whether we've got a magician coming to our table at a restaurant, or whether we're going to see a magician or a singer or an actor or anybody, you want to connect with a person. That's really all it's about. And I make the point that our job is to connect. That's our first job more than anything else. It doesn't really matter if you're then singing or doing magic or whatever. Your first job is to properly connect. And there's all sorts of reasons why I think the very essence of magic makes that difficult. Like if you can click your fingers and make anything happen, if you are this, super man or woman figure, or at least that's the story, then it's very hard dramatically to make that interesting. Teller talks about this. What we find interesting are heroes. So heroes are people that struggle and they try and do something, but maybe they end up somewhere else, or they fail, but they, learn something. And that's not really what we're presenting as magicians, are we? So there's things like that is all the stuff I think we have to find interesting ways of getting over. And I think that applies to all levels of doing magic, and just generally anything if we're going to stand before an audience, because ultimately whatever we do, we're there to connect.
It's my favourite quote in the whole book, actually. You mentioned that. I've got it written down here. As you say, it is in truth the power of a human relationship which they seek. Our job is always to connect. It's my absolute favourite thing, and I think it's something for everybody to consider, is what do they want, not what do we want, kind of thing. I want to talk to you a bit about pacing. If I may be so self-indulgent to just say, I find watching Mentism really hard. I don't perform it, and it's because it's so slow, generally speaking, for a magician. There's you, I can watch Graham Jolly, who I love, because he's just relentless. But I want to know how you consider pacing, because you seem to have found actually some of your pieces aren't very long, but there isn't an issue there where it's boring. How are you doing that when some of the other mentalists are not able to?
I think I give the example of this in the book, and it was, I think I don't say that it was me, but it was absolutely me. I was years ago rehearsing for the very first show that I did, which was just called Derren Brown Live. It didn't make it to TV, and a few people helped with directing it. One of them was Peter Clifford, who I'm sure you know, a lot of you know, is a good friend of mine. And I was, and this, I always stayed with me because it's such a common mistake, and I'm sort of pleased I made it because his response really made it clear to me. We were just rehearsing a bit, and maybe someone had thought of a name of a friend. And I'm saying, okay, so think of the first letter of their name, do this, do that. Okay, I think that's first. Is it a P? Is the first letter a P? Yes. Okay, all right, think of the second letter. All right, do this, do that. Okay, look over here. I think the second letter, I think it's an E. Is that right? I think it's an E. Second letter is an E. Is that right? Yes. Okay, all right. Think of the third letter. And I'm halfway through getting there. Okay, it's Peter. We know it's Peter. It's Derren Brown. Yeah. I thought, oh yeah. So if I'm taking longer than the audience are to get it, then they're better at it than I am, right? And actually, but in that kind of urge to make something feel very authentic and real, you can lose touch with what actually is coming across. Probably as soon as you say P, you could guess Peter, right? You might be wrong, but why wouldn't you just do that? So that's part of what bogs it down, I think, is falling in love a bit too much with the sheer sort of process of it. And I think also that thing of you're assuming a sort of a status which you think gives you sort of license to just I don't know, sort of expand into every moment, and that's just it's really bad. I mean, there shouldn't be anything. You again talk about it in this, but you need to earn those things. You know, if you're going to, it took me several stage shows. They all started with a game. I'd come out, let's play a game, and which boxes my shoe in, or put a coin in your hand, or whatever. They all started with a game. I was very much on the front foot, and it was about 4 or 5 shows into that. I mean, like, let's do something different, and maybe I just come out and sit on a chair and just talk. And it's like 20 minutes into that show before there's a trick. And I think you do have to kind of, and that's weirdly thinking, well, have we earned this from previous shows? But even just within a show, you need to earn those moments if you're going to sit back a bit or take your time or just think that you're interesting to an audience without proving it. So I think those things, it's just easy to misjudge them. And not working with a director, that's a big thing in the book as well. I think it's everything, because they are there to go, ooh, that really drags. We need to really tighten that up. And that doesn't mean you need to smash out on a professional director, but having someone that you trust and having the ego to just go with it, you know, because it's tricky. Magicians, I think, particularly mentalists, I'm sure, because the ego thing is to let that, you know, to let that happen. It's very liberating. And I can't judge. I've never seen my shows. I am facing the wrong way. So having a couple of people in the audience who you feel would spot the things you'd spot yourself, but also a whole lot of stuff that you'd miss, that's, you know, that shouldn't be a sort of ego issue at all. That's just a liberating and helpful thing. So yeah, that also would stop a lot of that. And the same with, you know, plays that are badly directed. Would same problem, you know, things start to lag.
You mentioned your collaborators, Andrew O'Connor, Andy Nyman, and they're obviously mentioned many times in the book. I wanted to ask you, what roles do they fulfill individually now? Like, because they're your collaborators, your directors, but do they bring different things to the table? Well, different. We've all got different personalities, so in that sense, it's different. In terms of like creatively, in a way, no. I mean, we're just like we operate as a sort of a wodge because we've worked together for so long. Andrew, I suppose the difference with him is that he's also, well, I'm technically a producer of the show, but I don't really think like that because that's far too grown up. But he is, whereas Andy isn't. So Andrew's got that sort of producer head on a lot, which just gives him a different
urge, I guess. I think he talks a lot about, you build the cake, you make the cake, and then you put the icing on, and then you put the cherry on top of that. And it's very, as in how you build a show, right? It's very easy in a rehearsal room, or if you're sat writing a show in your notebook in a cafe, to get obsessed with the icing and the cherry on top. So you've got to build the cake first. You've got to get the structure solid, and you can look at all those other lovely, delicious moments and things later. So having a proper grown-up producer in the room is very helpful. But yeah, they're different. We're all different. Andrew is very sort of, he's very measured, and he's very good at keeping everything in check and everything according to schedule. Andy is more playful maybe, and maybe like me is, like, because we're now rehearsing Unbelievable together, so the three of us are now rehearsing, so I kind of see our differences come out a lot more. But I'm very interested in people's performances, and I leave the structure stuff a bit more to kind of Andrew. And I think probably Andy is perhaps a little more like me in that way. We both love that kind of stuff. So we all bring something different to it, but in terms of like who thought of what or who contributed what, that just, we totally think as a unit of three, and we never make a point of clinging to anything we feel we've contributed, and that's really nice. It's a really lovely, friendly environment to make a show, and whether it's my own or this other one.
Is that always the case? I mean, 20-year collaboration with them. Has it always been rosy? Like, has there been some tough times with them, creatively? Have there been ever times where you disagreed with them? Or I assume you get the final say because you're the guy on stage, but have there been some tougher times over the years?
Not really, because we've got so much. Because part of working together that long means we found out how to work together for so long, and there'll be creative differences, of course, over stuff, and we just wouldn't. The other two of us wouldn't dream of doing anything if one of us really hated it. So either that person goes, okay, I don't get it, but maybe I will, and whatever, let's keep it in, but I don't like it. Occasionally that happens, but generally we listen and we talk about it, and we go, so if you don't like it, we won't do it. I suppose, yeah, it's a genuinely loving thing, and we've done it so often that I think we've just got a really good rhythm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, here's something interesting. I'm going to take a risk here.
Okay.
Why don't you use electronics? I won't say any more than that, but you don't use electronics.
I don't use electronics, no.
What? May I ask why?
If I was doing close-up gigs sometimes, I might do, or the odd stage gig I might do, but it's not well, the big thing is it's just not a practical world to get into if you're doing a show every night. It just isn't, because things that are over-engineered or might not work won't work sometimes, and then you're stuck. You have no control over that thing. I like to perform my own miracles. I like to feel responsible for my own stuff and be in control of them, and be in control of what's happening. And so often there might be an electric, not like an electronic thing, but just like an openly like electric bit of theatrical gubbins, because something needs to float up in the air or something openly, like not secret electronics. And those are always the things that don't work, even at really simple, big, level. It just, stuff like that goes wrong. So I just want to minimize that. And also, I suppose if there's a lot of things. There's I guess a bit of a rant. I could go down that. There's the fact that because the electronic stuff is so sort of kind of perfect, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it means that it's very easy to put them right in the center of the story of what's happening. Tommy Wonder has this lovely thing of the highlights of the story, the highlights of the trick give you the story of what happened, the bits that people remember. Those little moments that are spotlit give people the story of what happened. But for every highlight, you're going to have your moment of shadow, and the shadow's where you put the methods. And that's such a lovely, helpful sort of image. And the trouble with some gizmo that can do anything 95% of the time is that you put it right up in the in the story. So then the story becomes, how did you know what I've written? How did you know what that die said? Or how did you, it's right there in the story. And I think that's, because it's too easy to do that because the thing does anything. So I think it's just not very, that's not helpful either. I do discuss some of them in the book, because I was talking to a friend who was saying he couldn't get over people going, he had using a clever dice set and couldn't get over people going, well, that's amazing, is it a special dice? And how do you get over that? It's like, well, you are making the question, how did I know what number you chose? That is the only question, so why not? And I suggest another route to go with it that would take that out of the question of the out of the story of the trick, so it isn't the question people are asking. And then, of course, if you also need a backup, right? So if the night doesn't work, you need a backup. In order to make that backup something that's ready to go, you'd need to have that thing worked in. You'd need to be using that backup every now and then to make sure you had a muscle memory for it. So why don't you just do that? Just simply do that. So yeah, I just don't, and ultimately I just feel safer, because the times when I've, early on when I was, oh, that's exciting, I'll try that. It'll just not work, and then you're just stuck. It's horrible. And mechanical things, I guess, could do that too, but you have a bit more control over something that isn't beaming wirelessly to your belly button or wherever. I don't know where these things are.
Yeah, particularly when you're doing a lot of shows. I get it. And talk about doing a lot of shows. Your last tour, Showman, the tour was only 2 years. You then did 4 months in the West End. I want to talk to you a bit about
why it's a long book.
Yeah. Lots of time in coffee shops.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you a bit about your longevity in a moment. But before I get to that, one of the things I wanted to ask you is, when you're doing a tour that long and you're doing that many shows, and you're a solo performer out on stage every night, dealing with different members of the audience, how do you stay present when it's the same script, the same effects every night on such a long run?
It's a really big, all stuff I talk about, because I was very aware of this kind of stuff, because I was writing and performing at the same time. It's not like an easy answer to that, but the nature of any sort of acting performance, whether it's kind of what we do or proper acting, is really that you're not, I don't ever learn. I'm doing it is a script that I'm using every night, and hopefully it doesn't sound like a script. Hopefully it sounds like I'm making the stuff up as I go along, and I don't learn big chunks of script apart from the odd bit that just has to be. But generally, the process, and I presume any actor will tell you the same thing, certainly the ones I've spoken to, is that you a thing that you're saying triggers a thought. It triggers a thought and a feeling that then bounces you to the next thing that you say. So as long as you're clear what you're feeling, and you've got this whole sort of, call it a silent script or in a monologue or whatever you want to call it, but as long as you're feeling those things in real time as you're saying whatever you're saying, it should always bounce you to the next thing and therefore the next words. So in other words, the process of saying those things convincingly and being present are kind of one and the same. And it's only when something goes a bit wrong, or you've got a woman with her head stuck to the bar upstairs, that you're kind of like, when your mind starts to go out of it, that's when you'll start to forget lines and things, because you're not really in it and feeling it. So therefore you're not in that process that's naturally constantly supplying the next line to you. So that's very helpful. But then even despite that, you're just ill, or you've had a terrible day, or you're just bored, or it's just for whatever reason. How do you do that? And there are technical tricks you can choose to make. And I've never done a tour as long as this one, so I hit a point. It was around Liverpool or whatever that was, that I sort of suddenly went, oh, I'm not enjoying this, and I haven't really had this before, because it was maybe like 4 months. I don't know, maybe 6 months in, and I think the longest tour I'd probably ever done before was 6 months. And I was sort of like, oh, this is interesting. And I spoke to the guys backstage, they're all a bit like, yeah, sort of, all feeling it a bit as well. So one helpful trick is to change the emotional delivery of what you're saying so that it bounces you back into that process. So the line that you always say in a sort of flat or serious way, you make funny that night, or round the other way, or you do anything to kind of bounce you into forcing you into being more present, and that really works a lot. I found out that Thurston had a mantra before stepping out of going, "I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you," about not in front of the mirror, about the audience. And I thought that was lovely. I'd had this experience that was, again, another one of those little pivotal things for me. And it was on Broadway, and I'd had this trick called Guess Whom, which was pictures of the audience that we'd take Polaroids and have them out on the table, and people would pick one each. They get mixed up, and then I'm playing like Guess Who, and people have their hands on my shoulders, and I'm turning photos over and finding who they're thinking of. And there was this night when, and the nature of the trick, as you can imagine, is that if I'm sloppy at the beginning, it's just all going to go wrong. And there's like, it's a 15-minute routine, and I've got, so this happened one night. They picked their photographs, and the photographs all get mixed back in with the others, and I realize I've made a mistake, and I don't know what any of them are, and I'm now like going through this routine thinking, I need to just stop and start this again, but I can't think of any logical reason why that would make sense as to why. I can understand why I'd go, hang on a minute, everybody stop, let's, okay. But why I'd have to make them pick them again and go through all that, it doesn't make any sense. So I'm thinking all this, and of course as you're thinking that, you're just feeling like the audience are just staring through you and hate you, and they've gone from being this really friendly room to just, this. No. Friendly room to just a room of people that can just, fake. It's horrible experience of that stuff starts to fall apart. Anyway, so I got to the end of the trick, and it just failed 4 times in a row, and that was the trick, just died. And then there was just like a gag in the show, like a minute later, that still worked. Like the audience laughed as they should have done, like 300 times before. And I thought, oh, okay, they didn't care. That didn't bother them. That trick didn't work. Okay, that's interesting. The next night I went out and I made the same mistake, exactly the same mistake. And I'm now starting the routine again going, I fucked this up again. I got exactly the same problem. But yesterday they didn't care, so that's good. So rather than just sweating as I had the night before, I'm now thinking, all right, maybe the fact that, the night we saw it didn't work, maybe that's fine. It's just how you deal with failure that's sort of, all that's going to matter, not the failure itself. Maybe the failure itself would be quite interesting. So I sort of didn't feel as bad. Again, same thing, got through it, no way of getting out of it. Trick failed. I did the same thing a third night. It was 3 nights in a row. And by the end of that third night, I was sort of enjoying it. I was narrating my experience. Like, I've messed this up. I think I can't start again. I think this is going to go wrong 4 times in a row. I know you're all thinking I'm just saying this, but no, I do actually. I'm sweating. I've got sweat going down the back. And so I was kind of trying to make it part of the show. Never made the mistake again. But what it did for me was there's this thing, isn't there, that no matter how much you do want to give to the audience or however much, whatever that is, there's still a little bit of you. You're trying to fool them. So if things go wrong, there is still that little element of hostility that's still there. There's the potential for hostility, which you only feel when things start to go wrong, and then suddenly it feels adversarial. So I thought, well, that was it. I'm obviously never going to make that mistake again, and I didn't. But I feel like that's as bad as it's ever going to get, and it's fine. And I felt that last little bit of hostility just go. So I remember the next night thinking, so what if I went out and thought, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. And if that was what I would go out with. And I know, and again, it sounds a bit sappy, but it does change things, because then in your head, you're really thinking, this is not a chunk of script I've got to get through. It's actually something I want these people to take away. I've written this show we've written it, but I'm saying this because I'd like you to listen to this, and I think it's important in terms of, because really those moments of being sloppy, whatever, do come out of very much not being present. But it brought me back to a thing I could take out with me. That's what it was, of what if I just loved these people? It doesn't matter. That's a weird thing to say out loud, but it's just it's a nice little thought, a nice connection to make in your head when you're in the middle of performing and have had a drab day, because it just brings you back. So you find things like that, I think,
yes,
that help with your enjoyment of the show, give you a reason for doing it for 14 months, and in the moment might make it feel more in the moment.
Showman, there's something very interesting about it, which I keep my ear to the ground. And I've heard that it was the most commercially successful show you've done. And what I find most extraordinary about that is, as I touched on earlier, is your longevity. You've been around now for 20 plus years, and most magicians, if you look at history, they're on the decline by then. You seem to be still growing. Do you have any theory on why it's not only still successful, but it's bigger than it's ever been before?
Okay, that's a hard thing to say. No, it's very nice of you to say. Hard thing to answer. There are some things. First of all, my manager Michael, was very good quite early on at saying, take it slowly, slow burn. And I think that was really helpful. So I never sort of, there was never like a big sort of splash of me kind of, doing high profile stuff quickly. I've never done.
You said no to a lot of things, didn't you? I've heard that.
Yeah.
I've heard Barclays Bank offered you a couple of £1 million to be the face of the bank, and you said no. I've heard that rumor a few times.
Did Michael tell you that? Because I've never heard
Oh,
that.
maybe he said no.
Right. I suppose. I'll make a note. I think actually what you say no to is very important with these things. Plus, I'm not very, I don't want to go on panel shows, and I don't like particularly even doing TV. I mean, I'm just not quite that animal. So that's easy for me to sort of not do a lot of stuff. But I think that has been helpful. So that does help, and that's in a way that's a sort of a strategy, but it just chimes very well with me. But I think I suppose if there is any truth to that, I think a lot of it is letting what you do grow up with you, and I've definitely tried to do that. Showman is not. It wouldn't have made any sense to do that show when I was, 30. It's definitely a show for a kind of middle-aged man, really, and that I think I got a bit bored of doing the mentalism, the street mentalism. It's sort of, I suppose, been a response to David Blaine, I suppose. So, and again, because the bottom line is just, hey, aren't I clever? So that I kind of grew out of that a bit, and I thought, well, I need to listen to this voice that's going, oh, because should I just stop and do something else? So I changed I say I like it, but we as a body of people making the show, we kind of shifted it to, now I'm behind the scenes, and you've got a real person going through a drama. Now you've got a hero. You haven't got the superhero figure. You've got a hero, a member of the public, going through a real drama. Suddenly that's interesting again, and I can be behind the scenes pulling the strings. That's fine. So that was sort of interesting. And then with whatever I've done, particularly with these stage shows, I just tried to make them about something other than how the tricks are done, or whether I'm psychic or not. I just don't find those questions that interesting. More at the beginning, but not so much now. So I think if you can bring your own life into something and make it about the things you genuinely find interesting, and it's hard if all you know is the thing you perform, whether it's magic or whatever. It's hard to, if that thing is bigger than you, how do you move it anywhere or do anything different with it? You want to have one foot in that and the other foot in the rest of life, and then you've kind of got the leverage to maybe take it somewhere different. So I've always tried to do that. So having us maybe a bit of distance from it, and kind of not having a love-hate relationship with it, but just having not just being all in, I love every aspect of this, but getting a clearer sense over the years of what genuinely excites me and what really doesn't. I think those things are helpful, and also just a sense of, as I've grown up, what other things in life I think are interesting and probably more interesting, and then I try and bring those into it. It's potentially quite childish and attention-seeking and dishonest craft. So how do you... I remember Richard McDougall saying to me once, and I think someone had said this to him, of all people, who's so magnificent as a magician, and I think he was doing close-up somewhere, and someone had said, and if it wasn't they didn't say it to him, he was certainly telling me the story, made the comment, oh, you're sort of one step up from a rose seller, aren't you? And it was, him or whoever. Maybe he was telling the story about a third person, but it really, I that really, at its heart, it is so it has the potential just to be dishonest and sort of and a bit childish. So how do we make it grown up and honest? And then it becomes an interesting thing. Like everything's an interesting challenge to go. Okay, so how can this thing be about more than just the magic? And then I think that, for me at least, keeps it interesting, and then allows it to grow with me as I get older. And I suspect, just in terms of just the sheer number of years or whatever, that's probably, I would think, a big part of it.
I wanted to ask you one more thing before we go to the Q&A, which was throughout your long run, something I've noticed is you're an incredibly private person with regards to your actual private life, but you touch on it a few times in this book about when you're doing these incredibly long, successful runs, you're away from home a lot and it affects relationships. How have you found a way to manage that when you're away for such a long time on the road and in the West End?
Well, it is hard, and it's not hard because you miss being at home, because probably you are having great fun, and I get to have, my days are entirely under my control. That's lovely. I can wake up late, I go out and I have breakfast, I sit and write all day, and then I go and do the show. I mean, it's a magnificent way of being. And that's not just for me because I'm doing the show, it was the same for all the other guys as well. So we had Andrew Frost and Alex Hansford, Bradley Hodgins, I mean, amazing magicians. A guy called Tom Bradford, who joined us, and Tom Barford, who joined us, and then they taught him magic, and he went from knowing nothing to being a member of the Magic Circle, and I think missing the inner Magic Circle by 1 point or something. They taught him this amazing stuff. So, but we all felt the same thing. We're all going through it. And it's not so much that you miss it. It's the fact that if you've got someone at home, it's the slow build-up of resentment from them that you're off having fun with your friends, which is what it looks like. And it's sort of true, but you've also, potentially worked very hard for it. And the difficulties of when you do go home for a weekend, you want to rest, but they've been doing all the domestic stuff, and now it's your turn. The last thing they want is you just to sit down and sort of somehow expect the world to fall into place like it has been doing every day while you've been away. And then afterwards, you've done a show every night for however long, and that's really odd to not be doing that. And you're not aware that's what it is, but there is this sort of irritable thing that creeps in, and you don't know what it is. It's basically nothing is giving meaning to your life unless you happen to be straight onto another project, whatever that is. But that's difficult because you don't recognize it as that. I do now because it's happened so many times. So you naturally blame your partner or blame somebody else for the fact that you're weirdly miserable, and it's not. It's just the fact you're not doing this thing. You haven't gone out, had the same adrenaline thing, had the same. Even sometimes it's weird. Oh, it's 7:30 again, and I'm feeling like this. Why is that? That's what's happened. So yeah, there is all of that as well. Which is a big part of the experience of touring. It is difficult for the person back home. So that has this sort of, if there is a person back home, so that does have this kind of knock-on effect and starts to, because you can't understand why you're being resented, maybe. For all that's very difficult, particularly if it's the first time you've done it and been through it.
All right, so if you've got a question, raise your hand. James is out there with a microphone. James, have we got a question out there?
We have.
Hello.
Hello.
Thanks for doing this as well, by the way. It's been really interesting.
Thank you.
My question is, we heard a little bit about magicians and magic shows that you don't like to watch, but is there any that come to mind, especially in the last 10 years, magicians or magic shows that you've really enjoyed?
No.
And, and if there are, what did you
Any other question?
like or not like about them?
Oh God, no! Of course. I remember seeing Penn and Teller in Vegas. It was a few years ago now. Seeing Teller do the silverfish miser's dream trick with the aquarium. I was there with Andy, and we just had that proper. Oh, our jaws actually dropped. The jaws dropped. Absolutely just bowled over by it. Thought that show was amazing. The reality is, I don't really see very much of it anymore. It's not. I just don't. I don't really come across it very much, and I don't really then I don't sit at home and watch videos, and I don't go out to the theatre much and watch magicians. So I suppose the honest answer is I haven't seen a lot that I like, but that's not because occasionally somebody will send me something and God, that's amazing, that's great. But I've sort of just got a bit locked into my own thing for a while. I'm a big fan of Chan Canasta, but obviously, he's not around anymore. But I love it. I love it when something is just beautifully done. I find it amazing how easily we can get fooled by stuff that we know. Like we know how it's done, and we don't know how it's done in the moment because the story that was being presented was so sort of engrossing that it's lovely. It's also really interesting teaching all this stuff to non-magicians who are doing unbelievable at the moment, and how much we take for granted and doesn't necessarily come naturally or isn't intuitive to somebody else, and also what other strengths they can bring. So I still love it when it's done well. I just actually, for whatever reason, don't end up sitting watching it that much. So it's hard to pluck, 5 performances out there that I've watched over the last few months because I sort of haven't. But I sort of love the moments that are just satisfying, probably. And it's the theatrical moments, isn't it? Things that really get us are so often just a beautiful bit of thinking or just, oh God, what a great idea that is. And it's not necessarily anything to do with the magic. Again, it's this sort of theatrical thinking or emotional thinking. That's what really does it. So those again and again are the moments that get me and I like most. But they are not so often the priority for people. So I guess I don't see them so much, but when I do, I adore it like a kid.
What about when you were working restaurants and you were a close-up magician? What sort of close-up magic did you love? Because that's probably a time when you were immersed in it and reading things and watching. When you were more close-up, the mentalism.
No, but even then, I lived in Bristol and I was just doing my own thing. I didn't really know any other magicians. It was a long time before I did, and then very limited exposure. I mean, David Williamson, I suppose, who I just loved, and I went to a couple of magic conventions, Guy, Hollingworth, and others that were really, really wonderful. But I've always developed my stuff on my own. To me, that was the joy of it. I'd walk around the day thinking up ideas, and I'd go out and do them in the evening in the restaurant that I worked in. I very much saw it as that was sort of how you came up with magic stuff. But yes, well, of course, the moment this is finished, I'm going to think of 10 people that are sort of wonderful and really close to my heart. But over the year, yeah, I mean, Guy, I think is wonderful. He actually got involved in Unbelievable for a bit as well. He came and helped with that. And that was doing something totally out of his normal world, which was lovely.
You have another question?
Thank you for sharing those many years of experience first. And you talk about give something to the audience, something like a message. What is the message and why use mentalism to deliver it? What it have that you cannot deliver it other ways?
Well, only because I'm a mentalist, right? So that's sort of where I've ended up. No, it's good. But that's the point is whatever it is that you do, whether it's mentalism or singing or painting or whatever it is, that's sort of your thing. So it's like, what are you gonna do with it? If painting was just about showing how well you can paint, it's sort of not. You might have technically really interesting paintings, but it wouldn't necessarily be anything sort of great, So I think you whatever it is that you do, you just want to think beyond the technical into what can I use this thing? As I said, for me, I think that can be quite childish and dishonest and make something honest out of it, and grown up out of it. And that's only to make it interesting for myself. That doesn't mean there's anything bad with something being dishonest and childish, because so what? Like that, a lot of magic's amazing, and it's not saying anything or doing anything that's trying to be important. I mean, gravity, that's fine. It's not a judgment remotely. It's just that for me, to keep going and do a show every night for 8 months and blah blah blah, it takes 6 months to make a TV show, whatever it is. It's like you want to feel like I want to feel like I'm saying something that isn't just how do you think I did that? You don't know, do you? That's to me is not an interesting enough bottom line. And then as for what the message is, it will depend. We sit around at the start of our writing process, and although we all work together, probably that bit is going to come from me. It's going to come from what I feel I would like this show to say. But then we all discuss it, and well, the three of us will all have our own responses to that. So it very quickly becomes a group thing. And then also it'll change and shape as the show comes together. It was interesting that the hardest one to do it for was Secret, that played in New York. So because it was a sort of best of show, right? So when I did Underground here, which again was the same show, it was billed as a best of Derren Brown. But actually it was putting together, we were taking the best bits to then take to America and do for a new audience. So there it wasn't the best of because they didn't know me, but it was at least it was the best bits, so, right? We could put a good show together. But then that show there was no heart to that. It wasn't about anything because it was just, we would just put these things together. So it took about a week or two of doing it. And then it sort of suddenly clicked what that show was about for me. And it became about the idea that, because all I'd really heard about magic meaning anything was this idea of a childlike state of astonishment, which I always thought was a bit off, because if the magician's just got, bad breath and they're annoying, you are not transported to any childlike place of astonishment. You probably just want them to go away. And it takes all the responsibility off the performer to make it astonishing. And, if it just feels like it inherently is. It isn't inherently anything, is it? It's just what we bring to it. So I sort of, I kind of was going home thinking, so what this is about is that if we fall for a magic trick, if it really works on us, what it's showing us is your story of what you've just seen doesn't quite add up to the reality, right? You've missed something, right? That's the bottom line is, I must have missed something. That was, because my story that I'm telling myself is impossible, and I'm a grown-up, so therefore, I missed something, right? But that's actually a really valuable thing to remember, because that's what's happening in life all the time. We are building a story of what's real, and it's not all the information at all. There's all this stuff we're missing, and we need to kind of just lean into that sometimes and just accept that we are mistaking just the sort of our field of vision for the horizons of the world. So then it was like, that's what the show's about. And then we could put things into the show that just fed that idea a little bit, and then suddenly it feels like the whole show is breathing that idea. And actually it wasn't. It was 2 weeks into it, and it was a little thought and a few tweaks here and there. So sometimes the message comes last, which is such an odd thing to say, but it's sometimes you need to see the whole show and go, oh, that's what it's about, which is an odd way around of doing it. But Showman was about other things in life it was about a few things really. The things in life that isolate us or feel most isolating when life's difficult are actually the things that we all share, and life's difficult. We're pulled centripetally to difficult times and difficult places in life, and they feel very lonely when we're there. But actually, it happens to all of us. That's the one thing that we share with everybody. It's the one thing that connects us. And weirdly, then lockdown had just happened when we were living that out in a very literal way. The things that isolate us are the things that we're sharing. And it was partly about that, and it was about not sleepwalking through life, and other ideas that sort of kind of came out and settled into place. It was about a few things. I think it's important not to be too specific about what a message is, because then it just becomes a sort of polemic. And you want to feel, and again, something I talk about a lot in there, you want people to make connections themselves, because then they'll believe them and they'll have those moments of kind of, it's a big thing when you're watching a show or whatever, or a trick, or just to make the connection for yourself and to kind of have that thing. It's rather than just be told it, because what you're told you're going to work away from is you want to have people work towards the thing, so you help them make the connections themselves. So I think it's good not to be too specific, but just to present those things in a way that is light and is fed throughout, and I talk about attaching emotions to objects, so that you can talk in between tricks about a key that somebody, I'm just thinking of a key because I can feel a key in my pocket, but a key that somebody gave you and this person meant this to you in your life. And you're not in the middle of a trick, it's just a thing, an anecdote you tell, and then later if you bring out that key, it's going to bring all of that back with it, but people are making that connection for themselves. So it's going to mean more in that moment when you hold up the key and show it later, if we realize it's the same key, than going, you know, my granddad went blah, 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 and he gave me this key, and, you know, it can all be a bit heavy-handed. So there are ways of doing it that are light and constantly allow the audience to find it for themselves and aren't too specific. Peter Brook has a lovely, legendary theatre director, a lovely thing of giving people a kernel that they can take away. And it's like if you leave a good play, or, you know, you've sort of got you sort of know what it's about. You've got a feeling, a seed of something that you're taking away, but it isn't just spelt out like a political tract. It's something that you feel like you're making your own. I think that's important when it comes to that stuff.
You mentioned New York there, and I told you I think Showman was your best show to date. I understand you've got a bunch of offers on the table to take it to New York. Is that something you would like to do, or do you want to move on now to the next show?
Yeah, well, there's interest. I don't know if I have quite a bunch of offers. I don't know. I at the moment I just need a nice break, because Unbelievable as well is a big project at the moment, and the two things overlapped. So it's been a very dense period. So I said I don't want to do anything for a while. I might do. I mean, I've only ever done the things that feel enjoyable and interesting and fun. I've never had any ambition or vision for, like, I want to crack America or do, and none of that's never interested me at all. And I think that's a helpful thing I've learned to hang on to. So I'd go back. At the moment, this idea of living in New York again for another however many months isn't that appealing, because I feel like I've done it, and after a few months it is a bit, time to go home. So I don't know if I'm desperate to go back and do that again. But also, it would be nice. I love the show. I'm very fond of it. And it would be nice for it to have a little bit more life, other than that's done now. Then we've got to write another one. So that might be a reason to do it.
It'd be interesting to see how an American audience react to it, wouldn't it? Definitely. They're different.
Yeah, totally.
We have another question out there, James.
So I think one of the reasons why you're such a strong performer is because you sort of understand and have realized, particularly early on, a lot of the mistakes that magicians have made. Obviously, you've mentioned, magicians are told they're brilliant and they don't really get honest feedback. And you've talked about some of the issues we face as magicians. And obviously, the subtitle is 30 Years of Mistakes. So I'd like to ask, how can a magician identify a mistake or a common problem?
Yeah, I am talking about my own mistakes, obviously. That is important, right? Because those are the ones you really sort of learn from. It's easy just to sort of sneer at other people's mistakes, but you only kind of really, the only ones that are useful are your own ones. Well, I mean, the big thing again as a director, it depends sort of what sort of arena you're in. If you're talking about a stage show, I mean, I see it a lot, the magician at the end of a trick being slightly embarrassed to show the playing card, for example. So it's a really common, very unconscious thing. When the trick's finished, and it's like, thank you very much, and you don't really see it. Like, you don't really see what the card is, so you're a bit like, and it's just the slight embarrassment at holding it there. And in the same way, it took me a long time to take applause and stuff at the end of a show. I just found it all a bit eggy. But it just means the whole trick's gone for nothing, because a director would go, oh, hold the card up and give it a beat, because we're not really taking it in. Or you're standing in front of the thing, so we can't see it, or all that kind of stuff. And you can only know that if somebody's watching and they tell you. So that clears up pretty much all of it when it comes to a stage show, because that's the director's job to spot those mistakes. And then it's much harder if it's just you, if you're doing close-up or parlor magic or whatever, and you're not using it. You're not using someone whose job it is, because what you don't want is everyone's opinions on it. I did one of the shows. There was a switch of something I did with an envelope, which was bold. It was a really bold switch, but I thought it was lovely. And then a magician friend was in that night. I was like, oh, it's a bit obvious, isn't it? And it was horrible doing it after that. It was so horrible. And I asked Andy and Andrew, I said, is that obvious? They're like, no, it's great. And then every night I'm doing it thinking they can all see it, no one's going to fall. Which of course then probably did make it worse. So you don't want to it's not about just listening to everybody and asking everyone for their opinion, because then that's not helpful, and then you just filter out and hear what you want to hear anyway. So having a person or a couple of people that you really trust, whether it's a formal relationship or just, friends that you're calling upon, is huge. And then the rest of it, I don't know. I think you really can't rush it. So you read or you learn from people that know more than you do, and a similar sort of thing happens, I guess. And it is easier to listen to audiences on stage because, as I said, the politeness increases with proximity. I've seen a lot of close-up magic where I'm sort of slightly embarrassed. Like my relationship is with them, not because anyone I know, but you sort of are slightly feeling you're entertaining the person, the performer, for being there. Like it's sort of a bit round the wrong way, but you're sort of like, and then so of course you're polite and you're sort of trying to make them feel good. It's all around the wrong way. But that's not, I don't think that's unusual. So it's really hard to learn that stuff, to learn what you could do to improve it in close-up, other than just to, I don't know, as I said, be aware and show everybody and I don't know. I think it's very hard, but it is easier on stage because it's ruthless. If they don't laugh or start coughing, so you just listen for coughing. That's a big thing. Everyone's detached when they start coughing. So what do? You naturally want to lean into it and talk louder, but you don't. You've got to do the opposite. You've got to go back and talk quieter, because then they'll stop coughing and sort of lean in and listen more. So that's how you get people to pay more attention. But that's not instinctively. What happens instinctively is you want to talk up and shout and go, oh, you're not paying attention. But it is easier on stage. So yeah, I don't really have any answers for close-up other than just time spent, and you'll probably just naturally learn those things anyway.
James, you have another question out there?
First of all, thank you for a wonderfully thoughtful and thought-provoking conversation, and
Thank you.
really valuable. My question is, these are notes from a fellow traveller. So what's the destination?
I'm furious I didn't think of that one.
I don't know. I have no. As I said, part of not really ever having had any sense of ambition is there's never really been a destination. I kind of I'll sort of do it as long as I enjoy it, and that's, if I can find new ways of doing it, then hopefully that will last for long enough. I don't sort of there's nothing that I'm sort of thinking, aim for that.
Are you still enjoying it as much as you always have?
I am, yeah, I am. I am enjoying. I love touring, but I know what I don't enjoy. I don't enjoy the marketing side of it very much. I really don't. I really don't enjoy going on those American chat shows and stuff. That's why you never see me on chat shows here. I just don't. I hate all of that. But I have to do it out there because it's much more of a push to get people to come see the show because they don't know me. So I really don't. I enjoyed one of them, which was Seth Meyers, and they're very nice to you. I mean, there's no reflection on them. I just really don't enjoy it. So I don't do it. I'm very happy. I just like to be.
What is it about it you don't enjoy? Is it that you're there to sell something? Because that's kind of what they're all about over there, isn't it? Every little press spot is about selling.
Yeah, I think most people that are sort of in the business of show business or whatever they're out to be the best, and there's a real kind of drive. There's like a hunger for it. I just genuinely don't have that on any level. I'm a magician thing. Like I just love this is not really what we're about in our heart, is it? So I sort of I don't think so. So I kind of, as I said, it's only ever for me been about what's interesting and fun in the moment. I have like a manager and people like Andrew that are good at producing, and then other people, I'm sure they make all those kind of decisions and do that sort of stuff well, and maybe that's obviously a big part of, I guess, why things have kept going. But it's not really in my. I would, if there's a destination, it's sitting around with the dogs and walking around looking at things. I mean, that's what I'd like to be doing. It really is. Yeah, no more than that. It's just this is lovely. Like this is nice. This is like a lovely thing to be doing. So I don't really think beyond that. So yeah, no destination in mind. But I thought, it is notes because a lot of it is about the mistakes I've learned. So it comes from notes you get from your director. That's a big part of the experience, and a fellow traveller, because I'm a fellow traveller. But yeah, really lovely question, but no destination in mind.
Another question here.
Hello.
Hi. You've mentioned a few times the value of having notes from a director, but I'm assuming over a long run, most of those shows, Andrew and Andy wouldn't be there. So I wondered, after you've done a show, is it frustrating not to have those notes, or do you have another process or something else you do to make progress on those notes?
Well, they would no. I mean, it'd be quite annoying when they come actually. They probably might have come for like a couple of months, and then you're like, oh, everything feels really, really comfortable, and then they want to change something. So no, I mean they'll be there enough at the beginning when we're putting the show together, and then every now and then they'll turn up. But really, the fun of it is changing stuff from night to night. But I'm gonna change the stuff that is appealing to me to change. Something I'll notice or magically that can be improved, or a gag or something that stays in. So every night you're trying to take a little bit and make that part of the show. It's like a big bag of wet cement that just sets bit by bit every night until you end up with something solid, and then you're into polishing it. So there's always that work, always the work to be done, and that I think is really important because it just keeps you going. So it's not about, and they might come and see it and then go, oh, not really keen on that change, which is fine. So I'll go back to what it was before. But normally those things, I guess I've got the right instincts for those things now, so they're fine. So I find that more enjoyable than necessarily. The hard stuff. First couple of weeks when we're changing a lot is tough. It's not so much with Showman, but with the other shows, it's it's like you're doing a one-man, 2-hour play, and entire scenes are being changed, and you have to coming up with a trick and then doing it that night for the first time. That's a lot. So it's quite nice just to get into the rhythm of then just finding things in your own time. But it is lovely. We were making. I didn't really remember this because a couple of people have said to me, oh, did this actually happen? But we were making changes. Andy and I were making notes to, I think it was Enigma, on the very last night. And we're never going to do it again. We'd been to see it. We were sat in the dressing room going, oh, we could change this and do that. It's like such an enjoyable part of it that you don't want that to stop. But it's nice to find those things on your own. I think that's the real joy. Someone makes a gag and you go, oh, that's great. How can that gag happen every night? Not necessarily from me, but how can that be something that happens? It's lovely, and touring with people that know about magic as well. That's great because we can all talk about it and find little things that will help too. Yeah, it's lovely. It's the best thing.
You mentioned also about when you have a director that sometimes you'll think you've had a great night and they'll come off and say, oh yeah, it can go the opposite way to the way you expect.
Totally. I mean, that's a really, really common thing. Is they'll be in, I'll be like, oh, it was awful. And I'll be like, sorry, I'm really annoyed you came tonight. If only you'd have come last night. What are you talking about? That was fantastic. But the thing didn't work. No, but that was amazing. It didn't work. And we're all like, my God, it didn't work. It's not working. How's he going to get out of it? You got out of it well, that. So you can't judge it. And then other nights, I'll be like, hey guys, come in. What did you think? And they'll be like, we've got time to do some notes. And I'll be, and it was terrible. And I couldn't tell. I was facing the wrong way. Yeah, it's so important having that other perspective. It's so important.
We've got time for one last question, I think.
Hi there, Derren. Thanks for doing this. I've always been curious about preview one of a show. So you've been in rehearsal, you've been through tech maybe you've done a dress rehearsal or two with invited people, maybe, I don't know, but maybe it's 6 o'clock and the show's starting at 7:30. what's going through your head at 6 o'clock before you do preview 1?
And it's always the night that somebody from the Magic Cafe reviews it. And I don't know why they insist on doing that. Not his best. Don't want to read that. I tell you what does go through my head. And actually, it was a bit of advice that was given to me on the very first night of the very first show, and it was in Dartford. And again, I talk about this next. I think it's really important. I was sat in the dressing room thinking about, everything in the right place, and do this, I'm going to say this, and running through the lines, all the rest of it. And which is nothing. It's not helpful. It's like waiting for a lift and pressing the button. It doesn't make any difference, but you kind of feel like you have to do something. And Michael, my manager, put his head through the door and said, enjoy it, and then went out. And it has really stayed with me. I know it sounds a bit nothing, but it's not. It's everything. So first of all, I went, okay, it's whatever, half an hour to the show now. I'm going to stop worrying about these things. I'm going to decide now I'm just going to enjoy it. Because if I'm not enjoying it, probably people aren't going to be, or they're not going to enjoy it as much. So I'll decide now I'm just going to have fun. If something goes wrong, it goes wrong. It doesn't matter if I get something around the wrong way. It won't matter. I'll enjoy it at least. And then also, it's not just about your nerves 10 minutes before going out. That's also then how you write the show. Like, how do you write the show so you know you're going to enjoy it? Like, I didn't enjoy walking on glass back in Something Wicked This Way Comes. Didn't enjoy it. I think that was probably Andy Nyman's idea, I suspect. And I never really enjoyed it. It was just a thing that I didn't like doing every night. It was uncomfortable. And that just ended up, this wasn't fun. So to make sure that the things you're doing, weirdly like the last one of this, so I was, there was a thing for James Corden on his show in the States, one of these things I had to do to promote Secret. And I was doing this bit of a mixed up thing of Magic Square and mind read or something, a bit of a mess. Anyway, the nature of a Magic Square is that it's so kind of, and then that adds up to that, and then that adds up to that, and then that, and we're doing it. And I thought, this is horrible. This is such a horrible experience. I'm just sort of going, it's what it feels. So how do you? And I stopped. I said, this needs to be enjoyable, and it isn't. So, and Andrew, who I was rehearsing it with, who totally gets that as well. So we're like, okay, well, how because we have to kind of do this trick, couldn't really change it. So how do you make it enjoyable? So given that we have to do the trick, so it's simple. It's a surprise for me every time. So now it's like, well, hang on, that's 42 as well. So no, presumably not. No, that is, and then it became enjoyable to do, and it stopped. And actually, it's not just about your own private experience. That also it makes the trick more enjoyable to listen to than which is what it was. So it's really important. I do the same thing with the TV shows. One of the reasons why so many of the last bunch of TV shows is me sat in a truck watching monitors as some poor sod is going through, the darkest experience of his life. It's because I knew that would be really fun. Like after 6-8 months of all the compromises and difficulties of making a TV show, and all the people, all the things that I just don't really enjoy, I knew I could look forward to a really easy weekend of filming where I could sit and be like, oh God, he's coming in, he has no idea. All those months of that paying off now, and that feels great. So I really took it on board, and I really it's a really big thing. Make sure you enjoy it, and find stuff that you do, particularly with the stage show, because there is so much to think about, and there are so many kind of nerves, and that thing of waiting to go on is horrible. What do you feel that time with it? So just making sure you enjoy it, not just in your state of mind when you step out, but actually in how you write and form your act and put it together. I think it's really important. So that's what I'm doing. I'm making sure I enjoy it.
Well, I think it's time to wrap things up. So I'll ask everybody, have you enjoyed this? been amazing. Ladies and gentlemen, please show your appreciation for Derren Brown. Please downstairs.
Tonight was absolutely fantastic. I've never seen Derren Brown this up close in person.
Awesome evening.
That was amazing. That was, I think, one of the best nights in the Magic Circle.
Genuinely incredible. Having him that close, speaking to us, imparting words of wisdom that I'll remember for years to come.
A real insight to what goes on behind the scenes, how he puts on the show, how he puts together the show.
It's been great being part of the journey. I saw Derren's very first show at Dartford that first night, which was just incredible. And then watching him at Blackpool Conference, just selling his first book on that little stand to today, incredible.
Oh my God, it was incredible. And then to leave with this, I'm going to treasure this forever.
I can't wait. I'm actually just finishing up one of his other books at the moment, Book of Secrets. So once I'm done with that, it'll be on to this one.
I think Unbelievable is going to be brilliant. I'm looking forward to going to see that. And the podcast is going to be great, yeah. So I'm going to be subscribing to that and listening to it and hoping to get lots and lots of more great, useful, helpful tips and information and more of the same, really. So yeah, brilliant.
Can't wait for the new podcast to come back. It looks awesome. I'm liking the subscription model because I think we're going to get some great content. And 3 shows for 1. What could be better?
I'm going to check it out. It's going to be sick. And I look forward to checking out Unbelievable as well. He's been an inspiration for the last 15 years of my life. So it was amazing to get the book, get it signed.
It's always good to hear Derren and his thoughts on magic. Really thought-provoking. And yeah, just what a pleasure. What a pleasure. What a treat.
How often do you get to look at a living legend who's been out there and done it for 30 plus years and then get all of their inside tips and information? Looking forward to reading this. Richard started out by saying he thinks this book is going to change the face of magic for magicians, and I think it is.